Today we're going to look at the formation of the very first political parties in the United States. We had the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists. If you remember from our discussion in class, we know that one of Washington's early steps is to create a cabinet of advisors. Two of the most famous and powerful members were Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. These men will disagree greatly on their future vision of America and constantly be trying to sway George Washington on their beliefs and to their side. Alexander Hamilton is the founder of the Federalist Party. I want to take a minute and remind us of where we have been and how we got to this point. Remember, Hamilton came as a young man to the United States and when we were still colonies and started to get involved in the American Revolution, serving under George Washington. He will go on to become an influential member of the Constitutional Convention and famously be one of the three writers of the Federalist Papers trying to convince Americans in New York to support the ratification of the Constitution. Under Washington, he will serve as Secretary of Treasury and have the goal of trying to pay down the debt from the American Revolution. Many of the ideas that he comes up with in his plan will be very controversial, and Jefferson will disagree greatly. These men will fight over these issues as they try to convince Washington to join their side. Throughout the semester, we're going to trace political parties, how they've changed and altered. But before we can get to that point, we have to talk about the very first political parties and their differences. And obviously, many of their differences centered around the issues of that time, which wouldn't be quite as important today. You'll see some similarities and then some things that are unique to this time period. So let's start with the Federalist Party. The leader of the Federalist Party was Alexander Hamilton. As you know, he created the bank, so he's going to be in favor of the bank. He's also going to support high tariffs to protect what we call infant industries. So these are baby, like really young American businesses trying to get off their feet, and they're competing with Europeans, especially the British. And so the tariffs would be taxes on imported goods to help the American companies, and he was dramatically in favor of this. Economically, he really desired for us to be like England. I know that seems so strange coming out of the Revolution, but he saw the early signs of industrialization in England and he wanted us to follow that. So he thought that that was our future, was commerce and industry. When it came to the role of the government, he supported a strong central government. This shouldn't surprise you. He actually wanted us to have a strong alliance with England. Okay, primarily because he really respected their system and wanted to model ourselves off of them. His support typically came in the North, especially in the Northeast and cities with merchants and traders and bankers. And then last but not least, the way that he looked at the Constitution was very loosely. Remember, he thought it could be stretched as needed, as you saw with the discussion of the creation of the bank. As we transition and starting to talk about our second political party this time period, we want to do a quick review of Jefferson and Madison. Both of them are founding fathers. Remember, Jefferson is part of the Committee of Five and is the key author of the Declaration of Independence. He spends some time in Paris as a diplomat and also serves under Washington's cabinet as Secretary of State. Madison is also a revolutionary figure, most famously known for his role in the Constitutional Convention and being the father of the Constitution by writing the document, but also being one of the three authors of the Federalist Papers, trying to convince people to ratify the Constitution. That takes us to the creation of the Democratic Republican Party. Today, this is the first start of the Democratic Party. This is not the Republican Party. That will not come until the election of Lincoln in 1860. He will be the first Republican president, and it will have been formed the decade before. The leaders of this party are Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. Jefferson is completely against the bank. He doesn't believe that anywhere in the Constitution does it give the president or really anyone the power to create a bank. He also is not really in favor of tariffs because he believes that our economic future is with agriculture, that we will be a nation of farmers. Remember, Madison and Jefferson are from Virginia, so that kind of makes sense. He also favored strong state governments, not strong central governments. He had a deep loyalty to France, and when the French Revolution breaks out, he will firmly support our getting involved in helping the French. Most of the support for this party came in the South and then an emerging region of the West. So remember Kentucky, Tennessee. A lot of farmers, a lot of the rural areas tended to vote more Democratic Republican. And he had a very strict reading of the Constitution, okay? Very literal, word for word. If it wasn't in the Constitution, then you could not do it. That is the way that Jefferson and Madison looked at the Constitution. These parties will be the very first, and formation of these parties will upset Washington greatly. He didn't think that there was really a need for them. It probably made it even worse that this was happening within his own cabinet. But we need to know these parties, and we need to know what they disagreed on. One of the major domestic issues facing Washington as president was something known as the Whiskey Rebellion. And this occurred while he was president, and he has to deal with some upset farmers. So let's kind of start with the background here is, and this directly relates to what we just talked about with our political parties. As you know, Hamilton has devised a plan to pay off the war debt, and one of the things was to impose excise taxes on certain goods like whiskey. Well, many farmers in western Pennsylvania use whiskey really as a form of currency. They might not have the cash, but they would use their goods to barter and trade and get the things that they needed. In particular, a lot of times they would sell grain to distilleries that then would make the whiskey. And so this tax infuriated them because it put more of a burden on them. You should be seeing a trend here. Okay, people on the frontier feeling a great deal of resentment towards people on the East Coast. A story of the people with money and the story of the people that don't have money. And that's just kind of a good continuity that we've seen with Bacon's Rebellion, Shays' Rebellion, and now the Whiskey Rebellion. So that's kind of the background. They're upset about this tax. So in the 1790s, they start to protest in western Pennsylvania. And Washington has to decide, like, what's he going to do? So he sends in thousands of troops to put down this rebellion because he is commander in chief, as stated in the Constitution, and it's easily put down, really no major problems. So why is this so important? When we think of something like Shays' Rebellion, we learned that the Articles of Confederation was too weak to handle major problems that arose, like Shays' Rebellion. And with the Whiskey Rebellion, under the Constitution, our new government can handle problems that come up. They're equipped to do that. But as a side note, another impact of this is that people reacted very differently to Washington's actions. Some people really praised him and thought he did the right thing by sending troops, and then others, especially within the Democratic Republican Party, thought that it was really harsh, that there was no need to send all these troops to a couple of farmers that were protesting. There were about 500 of them, but still. And you see that more and more people on the frontier are turning away from the Federalist Party and supporting the Democratic Republicans. And that's all part of the Whiskey Rebellion. On top of feuding political parties and fights within his cabinet and disagreements over taxes, Washington also had to face trouble on the frontier. We have seen throughout the school year that as colonists and now Americans moved further inland, they would come into conflict with the tribes that lived in that region. We also know that the Ohio River Valley had been an area that was really in hot demand. Remember, it was part of the French and Indian War. We see it again with Pontiac's Rebellion and the Proclamation of 1763. So we really shouldn't be surprised that throughout the war, Americans start moving into what will eventually be called the state of Ohio. Well, there are many tribes that live there, such as the Shawnee, and then you have other eastern tribes that are being pushed into that area as well. Don't forget that the British are north in Canada, and they want us to fail. They are hoping that we are unsuccessful and they can swoop in and take control again. And so they're doing everything that they can to try to nudge and encourage the American Indian tribes in the Northwest to fight and attack the settlers. And so wars had been going on throughout the 1780s with the encouragement of the British. And one leader of the Shawnee in particular, Tecumseh, was a leader of many of these attacks. And so while Washington is president, there's a series of battles, the most famous being the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794. And it is in this area that you see on the map, the purple area. This is really where the areas that they are disagreeing of, and you can see if you go further north is where the Battle of the Fallen Timbers was. Well, Tecumseh is going to lose this battle, and the Americans will be successful here, which will lead to the Treaty of Greenville, which will give everything in the purple area to the new American government, which the settlers greatly agree. Tecumseh is so upset by this, he doesn't even sign the treaty, and he leaves. This is not the end of our troubles on the frontier. This is just an example of something that happens in Washington's presidency, and really a continuity of things that have been going on for decades and will continue to go on even as Washington leaves office.